I'd really love to tell you that it's going to get better, but I am having a hard time seeing how that happens with what this Jets team is doing right now.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support, especially as you continue to help make Locked On the number one sports podcasting network out there. Tonight's episode, you're going to want to buckle up because we're just coming off the end of the Caps game, Winnipeg on the road, and this was probably one of their worst games of the season. The scoreline's going to look pretty generous, 4-3, and the Jets' top line really tried to salvage this game, but yeah, if you look at everything else, top to bottom, Winnipeg basically got curb stomped for about 50 minutes. Ugly game, and I think it really starts to point to bigger problems for this team that the Jets kind of signed themselves into. They had a summer where we talked a lot about what they did. The free agents not really being at the top level, a team that lost some really big players and didn't adequately replace them in my mind. And now here we are in November, and the Jets are currently outside of a playoff spot heading into American Thanksgiving. Going to talk about all of that, the ramifications, and what this looks like for the playoff race coming right up in just a brief moment. Before we dive into all of the fun stuff, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So let's talk about Jets versus Caps. Obviously, I'm pretty displeased at the moment. I think a lot of you are probably feeling the same. This Jets team is just not playing very good hockey. Now, the last two games, I would say Winnipeg actually did pretty decently at 5v5. They just either couldn't get the extra save that they needed, or in the other game, they simply couldn't score, right? The last two games, I thought Winnipeg, despite the loss to Minnesota being a shutout, I thought that they played well. They generated really great chances. They really put the Wild defense under a lot of pressure. And against the Canes, they actually outplayed Carolina by a pretty decent margin, limited the number of most dangerous shots against. I think Winnipeg really created some good scoring opportunities. They just couldn't quite have that last say in the game. The game against the Caps tonight, not even close to the same. Winnipeg from lines 2 down and from pairing 2 down got absolutely slapped. There's no other way to put it. It was ugly. Salomonsson in his debut, I'm sure a lot of folks are wondering how he did. He had a couple of all right passes and some solid moments. He also had a really bad slip at the blue line that led to a breakaway goal against. I also saw some folks blaming him for the first goal against. I don't really think that one was on him necessarily. Sandberg was trying to manage a cross pass on a 3-on-2, and it put Salo in a pretty no man's land. There was supposed to be a forward or somebody covering the trailing skater and Carlson. There was no one there, and so Carlson just kind of shot through Salo. I guess if you wanted something from Salomonsson, maybe a better shot block attempt, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, first NHL game, probably not the most fun game to walk into because all of the Jets, bottom lines really just could not do anything. And it was really all on the Morrissey pairing and the Jets top line to try and do something to keep this team in it. Eric Comrie, I thought, did as much as he could, but he had a couple of moments where I thought he probably would not be thrilled with watching the footage back. It is what it is. I have a lot of time for Comrie as the backup, but I think we all understand that what happens when Hellebuyck goes down is that your number one franchise star who has bailed you out time and time again is no longer there to bail you out. And I think in a game like this where the Jets just were barely competitive for long stretches of the game, Winnipeg, I don't know, man. I don't really know what else to say. The Jets offense is just kind of non-existent right now. Either the top line has everything for the team or, there's nothing there. The Jets' depth scoring just doesn't exist. You've got a lot of veterans that the Jets brought in, and so far they have basically brought no scoring impact after the first 10 or so games. It's pretty rough, and it's why I keep talking about the Jets' top line needing to be split. But I at least thought that there might be a better, 5v5 effort against the Caps. Washington is a good team, and I think they were a good test of where Winnipeg is at right now. And the answer was just terrible. And I think this was probably a game where Winnipeg maybe looked tired, maybe looked sick. I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but it was just a really bad outing. And I think for a lot of Jets fans, seeing Winnipeg not able to apply pressure and really just get outskated for almost the whole game, it felt very humiliating in a way. This was supposed to be a really good moment for the Jets to try and come away with some sort of a bright moment ahead of American Thanksgiving. 2 points could put you back in the playoff position again. You could be back in the second wild card spot. At least, or sorry, you'd actually be just 1 point under the wild card spot, but a little bit closer. You'd feel not quite as bad being beneath the Sharks and Oilers right now. And yet here we are, fifth in the wild card race, below a lot of teams that were supposed to be rebuilding the past several years. And it's not a great feeling for the Jets. Winnipeg, I know, can play better than this, and they absolutely have. But I think at some point, all of these points that they keep dropping, all in regulation, mind you, it's going to put them in a spot where they can't climb out. Even if Hellebuyck comes back, what is he going to be able to do, right? How is he going to be able to save this team when the offense, is frankly drying up and just really hasn't been a present factor? So, this Caps game, I think, has kind of been the encapsulation of a lot of frustrations that have been building with this team. But I was just incredibly disappointed and dispirited to see how bad Winnipeg played, on this road performance. This Caps team, they're not exactly a world beater themselves. They had a very similar record to the Jets, just a couple of extra, overtime or shootout losses factored in there. So they, had played 2 more games. But otherwise, they were also 12-9 when you look at, the non-loser points. And they frankly looked like they belonged in a different league than the Jets do. So, yeah, all that to say, I think Winnipeg has a very long road ahead. Obviously, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how, I don't want to say that we were right about this, in the past summer, but I think some of us were probably concerned that this was a very possible scenario with what happened with the summer acquisitions and how the Jets tried to fill the gaps for a team that had lost Ehlers, Appleton, and some spare parts, right? So at the end of the day, it's just not good enough. And even if Winnipeg tries to rally the next few weeks, it's a long road ahead, man. And this next, 10, 15 games that were without Hellebuyck, we have no safety net. There is nothing to prevent the Jets from slipping further and further down, even if the top line puts on its best performance. And even then, the top line hasn't always been amazing in some of these games. So all I can say is buckle up. It's going to be a very interesting next few weeks. I don't really know how to unpack all of this just yet, but I want to start by talking about the summer and why, none of what's happening right now is necessarily the world's biggest surprise. Some of us saw this coming. Some of us expected it. And I'm afraid to say what we were kind of worried about being the worst case scenario has started to pass. We'll chat about that in a brief moment. Let's be honest, most of us can't name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track. And that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch can help you figure out if you're spending too much on those subscription services. Maybe your online shopping habits are getting the better of you, or maybe you're somebody who's investment savvy, but you're not really sure how your portfolio is doing. Monarch can help bring it all in one place, and you don't even have to touch a spreadsheet. They've got data visualizations to help you track and manage your spending. And if you've got a partner or spouse, they also have shared accounts, so you can always be on the same financial page. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKDOWNNHL for half off your first year. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about, the stuff that has kind of led to Winnipeg's recent dip in offensive form. And, I think a lot of people are going to start asking questions about why the Jets' bottom lines aren't producing and, how could this happen? How could we end up here? And yet, there's a fairly large size of this fan base that I think saw some of this coming. And increasingly, I think the Jets fan base has become more in tune with a lot of the more stats oriented thinking, maybe more of the what you might call progressive roster building. We all see what the rest of the league is doing these days. And I think with the Jets, what's happened isn't necessarily shocking, even though it is fairly disappointing. When you look at how the Jets tried to approach things, I think Winnipeg was hoping that, bringing back most of last year's group with a couple of changes, some veteran experience, some cup winning experience, and guys like Shen and Taves acquired in different ways, obviously, but brought in to try and reinforce this organization would give this core the winning edge. Where I think Winnipeg has started to misread the tea leaves is that the Jets are moving into an era where a lot of teams are getting younger, faster, more skilled. And look, it's not like size or physicality or strength is a bad thing. It can be really helpful. I mean, look at Protas from the Caps. He's a giant, but he's very mobile, he's very skilled, and he is a very high-end attacker. That's not always what the Jets have brought in. The guys that Winnipeg has brought in that are on the bigger side are players like Shen, Stanley. They're big and they have some solid shot blocking ability, but they lack the mobility and they lack some of the other key features of what makes modern NHLers really successful. Shen in particular has taken a big step back this year, and it's not like his debut with Winnipeg was the best either. I thought his first couple of games were solid last year, but over time you started to see the lack of foot speed be a real problem. And now you have a Jets team overall that's just not that fast. Winnipeg is one of the oldest teams in the NHL. They're now one of the slowest teams in the NHL. That's not really a recipe for success when everyone else is pushing in a different direction. And I think that the challenge for the Jets is that some of this isn't necessarily something that they can help in a way, right? The only way to really bring in the kind of talent that they need is kind of tanking or trading, right? But trading is a little bit challenging if you don't have the assets to make those deals possible. Tanking isn't really an option for Winnipeg. The revenue that the Jets rely on for attendance and from the playoffs, there's just no way that they're possibly thinking about tanking. Right? It'd have to be a very shadow retool in a season, even though they're going to call it competing and stuff. They would have to do some funky things on the back end to try and make this more palatable. This year they might be more forced into it than usual. You look at how they're pacing in terms of standings points and how the rest of the league is going. We're going to talk about the playoff implications for where this team is at and if they really are even on a path to the playoffs later on this episode. But I think the long and short of it is the summer did not set up this team for big success. Taves being your marquee signing is great in terms of the marketing and in terms of the brand image, but the reality is JT was probably being done a favor getting a contract as generous as the Jets gave him. A guy who's had 2 years off and was recovering from a very difficult respiratory infection that required some unique rehab and treatments. That really wouldn't be a big selling point for a big contract with many teams. Look at his bonus structure, right? Do you really think a lot of teams out there would be giving him like 5 or 6 mil for just playing in 50 or 60 games? Can't really see that being the case. And what has Taves been able to bring? Well, he's had a couple of solid games. I thought that one of his more recent games against, what was it, Minnesota was pretty decent, but already he's been dropped to the fourth line. Nyquist has also been dropped to the fourth line. And yeah, you're just not really seeing a lot of offensive production. Tanner Pearson, what did he bring in the game against the Caps? Well, they had like a 3-on-1 or a 3-on-2 against Washington. Pearson had a couple of guys he could pass to and instead passed it straight to a Capital. Awful decision, awful pass, and it took away probably one of Winnipeg's best chances to claw back into the game. So, yeah, not really looking so great there. Tanner, I'm sure, regrets that moment, and he's had some solid plays in the past, but the net is just not positive. And I think, out of all of the signings, the one guy that I thought I've been impressed with the most has been Cole Koepke, who was brought in to reinforce the fourth line. So, the Jets offense is really down to three guys on this team. Lowry is not a prolific scorer, and he's not being played with a lot of offensively minded guys, a lot of forecheckers around him. So, I think whatever upside he might have to be the 2C is probably being nullified. You've got Nemestikov back at 2C after Taves was brought in to be the 2C. So that can tell you how that, that experiment seems to be going. The Jets are just kind of in a hole of their own creation. And, they've also now doubled down on this core, re-signing Kyle Connor, Hellebuyck, Scheifele, all these guys to mega deals. And they don't seem to know why this team is not performing at the level that it should. DeMello expressed a lot of frustration the other day. I think Arneal's starting to really lose his own patience. Chevy at some point is going to have to react to this team. What we're seeing from this squad is a clear sign to me that the front office needs to be thinking about how to give this team help. It might not even just be for this year. It needs to be for the next few years, because I'm looking at the prospect pool and I don't know that there's a lot of internal assistance that's going to be able to help move the needle the way the Jets frankly need. I've got time for guys like Walton, and players of that caliber, but I don't really know that any of them project to be elite top sixers. We've got a lot of solid depth guys, but beyond that, I think we're kind of in a real tough spot. And I understand the approach this past summer was to try and gap fill, right? You weren't going to go out and get a big Brock Besser, most likely. They might have been inquiring as to Besser's availability. But I will say this, I think it was smart for them to mostly focus on one-year deals. It's why initially I'd kind of wondered if they were treating this more as like a gap season. If you make the playoffs, great. If you don't, it is what it is. You reset, you try and acquire maybe a piece with term from some of the teams that are selling assets and go from there. But, ultimately the Jets would never say this, even if they were. And I'm sure that they were trying to make the playoffs and be competitive. But I think it's becoming increasingly clear that, especially in a season like this where your margins are so narrow, what you did in the summer is just not good enough. And it kind of continues a trend recently from Chevy in the front office of sort of doing halfway measures. Last year's halfway measures included Tanev and Shen. Shen was very expensive too. He cost a second and a fourth, and he has continually been one of the worst NHL defensemen in the entire league. I'm not even exaggerating. He has literally been one of the worst players in the NHL, which is a shame, right? Because he's like a great leader. He's really praised the Jets. From what the rumors are, he has said that they've treated him and his family better than any other NHL team out there. So it's clear that there's like a really good relationship between the two, but that relationship hasn't necessarily reflected on the ice. And I don't know where we go with this, right? You can have a couple of guys struggle here and there on your team, but when you're a team like Winnipeg that doesn't have a lot past your first line to really bring a ton of offense for you, you just don't have a lot of margin for error. And I think that's where Winnipeg is at. It also makes me wonder if any of the players are going to start changing the way that they think about things. Would the top line consider being split up? Would there be internal pressure from guys like Hellebuyck and Scheifele to get some help because this team's not good enough as is? I really don't know. I don't know what the mindset is. I don't know if guys are just happy to coast along now that they've locked things up. I don't really know. I know Scheifele's mindset right now is probably to put on the best performance that he can so he can go to Italy and represent Canada. More power to him, and I hope he makes it. But I'll tell you what, for the Jets right now, unfortunately, despite him and Connor and the other guys trying to play superhero on every shift, it's not doing enough for this team. So I don't know. How do you get help for the squad? Where does the help come from? What can you even trade to get for that help? I don't know. We are running out of answers, and I think the Jets are, starting to run out of time a little bit. I think the one saving grace right now is that the playoffs are definitely still within reach, and it's not like the season is all that close to being over. But when you think about it, Hellebuyck is slated to miss, at least another 10 to 15 games. That's about, 15, closer to 20% of the season. That's a lot of games to leave in the balance for Eric Comrie and Thomas Milic. So I want to talk about this whole playoff push and whether it's even worth making that push this year. The more that this happens and the more that goes on, I'm starting to lose a lot of the incentive and motivation to think about the postseason. We'll chat about that in just a brief moment. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. And you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. If you're somebody who loves following these stats and players of the league and maybe believes that your knowledge is encyclopedic, this is your chance to turn your knowledge into big wins. If you think you know who's going to be the 3 points leader per game, or maybe who's going to be the MVP of the season, or which team might be winning the NBA Finals at the end of the year, this is your chance to take that knowledge to the next level. FanDuel keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push and going for the championship. So right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up with some thoughts on, Winnipeg and certainly the playoff push right now. I am starting to not really feel all that confident about Winnipeg's chances of making the playoffs. I know it sounds like it's overreacting because it's November, right? But let's be completely honest. It's American Thanksgiving tomorrow, and the Jets are currently 3 points out of the postseason. Technically, that's not a big deal to make up. The problem is there's a lot of teams that are between them in said spot. There's the Oilers, the Sharks, and just beneath the Jets are the Blackhawks and the Blues. Now, the Blues are a little, bit further back. They're 3 points back, and, they have 2 games more played. But the Hawks are legitimately closer to the Jets. And when you look at the overall team stats, there are some similarities. Also, in some ways, the Hawks kind of have some similar problems and weaknesses to the Jets, right? Their current strength has been Spencer Knight and Connor Bedard, but that team definitely has some real gaps. And, kind of like the Jets, they've maybe leaned on the goaltending a little bit too much this year. It's sustainable for parts of the regular season, but not for the whole year. And I think when you look at the Oilers, who have been just conceding goals left and right despite scoring loads, you have to think at some point if they make a move to bring somebody in net to solve this problem, they should see some sort of improvement and get themselves in a better position for the playoffs. Will the Sharks make it? Probably not. But, the teams in the wild card right now include Vegas and Utah. Do we see the Jets perhaps clawing back enough to surpass those teams? I don't know. Will the Wild keep up their current performance level where they've now won 5 straight and seem, destined to try and at least make a push for, an upper seed in the Central? It's really hard to say. I don't think that they're playing that well, but maybe they can parlay their defensive stinginess into something. It just seems like there's a lot of roadblocks to the Jets making the playoffs this year. I thought, at the start of the season that Winnipeg would probably get in relatively comfortably, and it has been anything but, right? All the injury luck that they've generally had the past couple of years has vanished this season. They've lost many of their most important contributors, and you look at the summer signings, not many of them are really panning out and doing anything that's able to move the needle. And so this Jets team is just kind of hanging on by a thread, it feels like. And the only thing that I could really think shakes this team up is a trade for like a big star, right? Or at least a mid-level top 6 player. And who out there is going to be selling? We talk about Owen Tippett, but I don't even know if the Flyers want to get rid of Tippett. Philadelphia is right around one of their own wild card spots. Will they want to auction anyone off? I can't really say for sure. What about Columbus? Are they a team that has anyone of interest? There's 34-year-old Charlie Coyle, I guess, technically an option. But I don't know what the value is, right? If the Jets are having this much trouble in the race for the playoffs, what happens when they make it? Your first round matchup, if you're in the second wild card, is pretty much guaranteed to be Colorado unless the Avs stumble. Your top wild card spot is going to get Anaheim, and like the Ducks pretty much laid the Jets pretty flat on their butts the last time they played. So, not feeling great about that. I just don't really have that much confidence in Winnipeg, having a deep playoff run and a lot of playoff success. And I just keep coming back to this thought that maybe this just ain't the year, man. I love this team, and I don't want to waste a season where I think they have a real shot. But everything I've seen about this team tells me they're not ready for it. I think the top line is doing the best that it can, but it's not enough. Hellebuyck, Morrissey, Scheifele, Connor, Velarde, those guys are phenomenal players in their own right. They cannot carry an entire roster, not for this long, not through the playoffs. And so I just don't know where this leaves us. It feels like this year might be the first time in a while that the Jets just outright miss the playoffs, and it would probably be by narrow margins. I don't know if that's going to be great because it means that they're not going to get a high draft pick in a draft that I think you really want a high pick in. But, Winnipeg just feels like they're trying to hang on for as much as possible, and I don't really know where this goes. It just feels like, at some point the front office is going to have to wake up to what they've built, and what they've assembled isn't much of a contender. It's a team that shows up every night and tries their best, but they are getting outplayed and outskated by some very good teams. And even some of the bottom feeders have really pushed them when some of their top stars were out. So, it's just not good vibes right now. And I think the number of solutions that feel readily available are very limited. So, it just might be that we ride this out, see where we are in a few months, and maybe we feel differently about this team. But, I think all the red flags are there to tell us that this Jets team is either not a playoffs team, or if they do make the playoffs, they're a quick first round out. We've seen the song and dance a lot with this team. It's not the first time we've been through this. It's why I think I'm not really keen to see where this team is down the road, because I have a feeling I know what we're going to see. And I'm really frustrated that, a lot of the skepticism that we had over the summer is starting to pan out in some of the worst ways possible. And obviously, the Jets have had some poor injury luck. That cannot be overlooked. But I think the overall narrative of this team and what's happened feels very in line with what some of us thought could happen based on what the Jets tried to do. So curious to know your thoughts. Are you sort of hanging it up on the season already? Do you feel like it's going to slip out of reach? Or do you hope that patience will be rewarded? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.